Not only has Sung been leveling in terms of power and appearance, but his bank account has seemed to level up quite a bit as well. What previously had only $300 in it now had over 135,000 just from one single raid. This may seem like a lot since to us it really is, but in the grand total of what can be earned by a hunter, hundreds of thousands to even millions are nothing but pennies to some. It's a natural part of the hunter economy Sung's very much aware of, and one he intends to cash out on as soon as he gets there. As for how he plans to get there, well, that's a bit of cut content that should have been covered this episode. An interesting plan I'll talk about later, along with everything else the anime couldn't cover from both the manhwa and novel. Before I talk about that though, I want to ask if we can rate the episode down in the comments. Just a number out of 10 based on your opinion, and if you want, maybe why you think that. I figured since I talk about each episode weekly, it would be cool to turn the comments into a kind of consensus board for it. I'll explain why more at the end, but for now if you want, just leave a number out of 10. Okay, episode 7. Let's see how far I can go. Covering chapters 25 to 27 from the manhwa and chapters 24 to 29 of the web novel. It was the night after Sung had fought Hwang and the others, and his first order of business was to distribute all the points he'd earned from them. With 10 now at his disposal, it was the perfect amount to bring agility right up there with strength. The stat we know from past videos he was currently allocating all his focus into. He did set aside 3 of those 10 for perception, but the plan right now was to even out agility with strength, after which he would then go to focus on vitality. So, with intelligence being the only stat getting ignored, the rest he was trying to raise evenly, leaving him a distribution looking something like this. This wasn't all that Sung had earned that day though, since by becoming higher than level 20, he had unlocked his access to the item shop, an extensive list of goods all available to purchase. Whether it be a cheap potion or a 10 billion gold set of armor, anything and everything was obtainable given he had enough money for it. So, from legendary daggers to impenetrable sets of armor, Sung had actual physical items that he could grind towards now. Unfortunately, he only had 112,000 gold himself, but the prospect of being able to earn more by farming instance dungeons was something he was even more excited for now. Combine this with the fact that he just wasn't broke anymore, and this whole endeavor was one he'd consider a worthwhile one. To specify on just how not broke Sung Jin Woo was anymore, well, before the raid he only had $300 in his account, then it was after that that he found himself with 135,000. He really wasn't kidding when he mentioned he'd be walking out with a mortgage payment here. As for how he accrued so much money, well, the entire thing had come from essence cores. The 49 C-rank cores he'd earned from the gate altogether sold for a total of $225,000. It was a sum that would have been split 10 ways had Hwang not betrayed him, but was instead all left to Sung as decided by Jinho. Selling them wasn't even that difficult, since in an economy where essence cores are more coveted than first edition Charizards, any cores up in the market were sold pretty much immediately. The only decision Sung had a tough time making was where and how he would choose to sell them. It could be in person or through a business or even to a guild or some online marketplace. Rather than use any of those though, Sung decided it would be best to go through an intermediary. It was the best option considering the amount he was selling. Granted, he would be subject to a 40% personal sales tax, but that was par for the course when not selling through a guild. For those who did, they were given a tax rate of 10%, a massive discount compared to what the non-guild hunters had to deal with. So, rather than the $135,000 Sung was left with on his end, had he sold through a guild he would have been left with $200,000 instead. A whopping $70,000 extra just for being part of an organization rather than an individual. Now, that may sound like how major corporations get tax breaks in the real world, but unlike them and their constant abuse of loopholes, guilds get a break because of what they have to deal with. You see, unlike a private party who can pick and choose which gates they want to challenge, guilds can't say no when they're ordered to mobilize, whenever the association or government calls upon them to act. Regardless of status or number of people, those capable have to respond and go immediately. It's kind of like being on call for work permanently. It's also the reason we saw the White Tiger Guild respond so quickly to the Double Dungeon incident. They were the ones called to investigate it. So, with that and the general danger of being a hunter being part of the daily guild member life, it was only natural several benefits and leniencies be allowed to them. Perks that would remain so long as they followed the orders of the government and association. This then made Sung think whether those perks were worth joining a guild for, but a few seconds of thought was all he needed to convince himself otherwise. when considering the money he could make when he was stronger, this 70,000 was really just pennies. It was a measly amount definitely not worth exposing himself over. This was a topic the manhwa and novel kept coming back to since there was quite a lot of effort being put towards keeping his leveling secret. That's not to say he wasn't on the association's radar, but after having already disproven the possibility of reawakening, the notion of him being involved in any of this was quickly disregarded. Since the core they'd used to test him was a superior A-rank one, it was near impossible for it to give a wrong reading. Thus the reason they didn't suspect Sung, despite giant arachnids being a boss not considered very threatening. At least not to hunters who were at Hwang's level. This now brings us to Sung's celebration of his newfound wealth, and the only difference from here was his choice to ingest Kasuka's venom. Unlike how he did so during his fight with Cerberus, after finding out he was immune to harmful substances, Sung instead decided to test the venom right here in his bedroom. Now, we already know this grants him a permanent 20% physical damage reduction buff, but to expand on the blessing which negated the other half of it, he basically has a constant passive which makes him immune to diseases, poisons, and abnormalities. Then, should he be weakened when going to bed, the rate at which he healed would be exponentially increased while sleeping. These were the two factors which applied after finishing the Courage of the Weak quest. One other detail that needs to be pointed out here is Jinna's realization that Sung had changed a bit. Ever since he'd started working out, to her something seemed a little bit different about him. She couldn't quite pinpoint what it was about his personality, but she was definitely taking notice of how tense he was all the time. He certainly wasn't the easygoing brother she knew from just a week ago. It's after this that we get to the scene with Jinho, and in addition to getting more information behind what he's planning, there were a few interesting scenes that were cut probably for the best. The first was one of the edgier things that I've read in a while the other was something that I think that they're saving for later. So, to start with the former, before Sung had even sat down to talk, a group of students would be in the cafe being very disruptive right next to him. Like, loud enough that no one around could hear anyone else talking to them. Naturally, Sung would get up and politely ask them to stop, but after being mocked sarcastically and even have a napkin thrown at him, he would escalate the situation in a way that does literally the exact opposite of keeping attention away from him. He would grab a spoon from a nearby table, ask the waitress how much it cost, pay for it right there in front of everyone, then crush said spoon with his bare hands while everyone was watching. He had turned it into a neat little ball which he would then drop right in front of the students. Of course, this was with the intent of showing them he was a hunter, but out of all the ways that he could have done so, this was definitely one of them. It was a funny and cringy scene from the novel that was definitely interesting. If we switch back to the conversation now though, it's also interesting to see how both sides perceive the other when going into it. Jinho sees a false ranker who kills for fun, while Sung sees a spoiled rich kid who treats dungeons like a playground. Both are widely inaccurate, yet for some reason both are still willing to hear the other out. For Jinho, it's because while yes, Sung did kill those men, he had also saved his life not once but twice. He had showed on both occasions that he wasn't just this cold-blooded killing machine. No, instead to him he was a patron of effort. A noble hunter who embodied absolute fairness and as such would never take that which he didn't earn. For Sung, his opinion was rooted more in experience, since in the world of hunters, those who raided did so for two reasons. It was either for money or a noble sense of duty. Since Jinho didn't fit into either of these categories, Sung assumed he was fighting just to experience it. To him, he was a rich kid who got bored of his safe and sheltered life and was now raiding in order to break free from that. The thing that had kept Sung listening was the determination in Jinho's eyes which made it seem it wasn't that. There was something about his look and tone that just made Sung curious to find out more. It was once Jinho had mentioned the Guildmaster stuff that's when Sung was able to start piecing everything together. He quickly realized it was all to further the reach of Jinho's father's construction company. Already it was deeply rooted in many different areas of business, but only recently had it started dabbling in hunter stuff. And this was a field that was quickly proving itself to be very profitable. The thing about taking part in the hunter business though is that in order to really start making money in it, the supervision of a guild was absolutely necessary. Like, say you wanted to obtain cores, corpses, or crystals ranking at the B rank or higher, the only way you could do so was through a guild, specifically one of the larger ones. So, with guilds being this middleman taking a cut of the pie, Jinho's father wanted to remove that. He wanted to start his own guild so he could deal with higher ranking loot directly. It was after all where all the money was at. We just saw how much Sung made from one single C rank gate, so I'm sure you can imagine the billions that could be made from higher ranked ones. I mean, it was enough for Jinho to just give away a $30 billion building like it was nothing, so that alone should be indicative of how much money could be made from it. The core problem, as we saw in the anime though, was the potential conflict which could stem from the Guildmaster and Deputy Guildmaster. Since the Guildmaster's authority was absolute, if there was ever a dispute between Jinho's brother and the S-rank hunter above him, that S-rank hunter could take down everything. They alone had the authority to do anything with the guild. If the Guildmaster was someone who would never betray the company though, this whole thing wouldn't be a problem to begin with. Thus the reason why Jinho wanted to make himself Guildmaster. The thing is, when compared to his older brother who had numerous achievements in business already, the only thing he, a 22-year-old college student, had was his status as a hunter. Unless he did something spectacular to prove himself, there was no way his father would ever accept the proposal of him becoming a guildmaster. To them it was much safer risking a dual leadership with the older brother and an S-rank hunter. So, this brings us to Sung Jin Woo, who out of all the hunters in the entire world is the only one suited to helping Jinho here. Reason being that if Jinho just went and paid stronger hunters to help him, to his father that would be no different from him just buying the Guildmaster license himself. If he raided with hunters who were on paper weaker than him though, then that alone might just be enough to prove himself. Perhaps it would show the commitment and leadership Jinho's father wanted in a Guildmaster. This was really the only thing Jinho needed, since once that position was earned, the rest would be simple. He would poach an S rank and make them Deputy Guildmaster, then after that the others were sure to follow. Just so long as one of the leaders were strong, that would be good enough to attract other strong people, making this a plan that essentially built upon itself. The first step of which was the 20 raid completion requirement. This now brings us to Jinho's offer, which was the entire 30 billion won building the headquarters was going to operate out of. A massive sum for sure when compared to anything Sung's experienced before, but what the anime didn't mention was that this was just the starting point. Sure, the base value of the building is 30 billion now, but once the building was made and the guild operating out of it, that 30 billion would grow significantly due to the simple fact that hunters were present. Since dungeon breaks were always a possibility, the closer a guild was, the safer everyone felt. And what was more valuable than a person's safety? So, even though 30 billion was what was offered now, in actuality Sung was looking at a whole lot more. It was at minimum the equivalent of winning 20 lotteries straight, a strings-free transfer that would occur once the guild had been operating for a year out of it. The only thing it would cost for Sung Jin Woo was the simple completion of 19 C-rank raids. Now, this was certainly a tempting offer, but when considering the full extent of what he could really make, even this was nothing when compared to the potential hundreds of billions. If he got to the S rank, then just the contract fees alone would be around how much the building was. I mean, this was after all a world where the number of S ranks dictated how powerful a country was. So, knowing just how valuable he could become, the most important thing to Sung right now was progress. It didn't matter how much money any single person could offer, since no regular human's wealth could come even close to that of an S ranks. That being the case, the only thing that did matter now was getting there. To him, he knew he just needed to grow his powers, and to do that he knew he needed to be alone. Joining a guild meant sharing XP, and raiding with others meant limiting his power. It also restricted when and where he could be all the time, and that freedom simply wasn't something he was willing to give up right now. That is, unless a certain condition was met. This was something I'm sure we'll see in the next episode, but the details behind it lead to a completely different outcome from what we saw in the anime. It's a decision that's probably spoiler from one of the next episodes, but at the same time is technically cut content since it's made at the end of this meeting here. I'll just briefly summarize the details for those who want to know, but for those who don't, feel free to skip ahead to this timestamp. So, the condition Sung came up with was that him and Jinho would be the only two to enter the dungeon. Just like how Hwang paid randoms to fill his party, Sung would do the same except pay 8 hunters not to do the raid. He would complete the gate all by himself and in turn get all the experience and money that came with it. Jinho would get the 20 raids he so desired, and Sung would get the opportunities he definitely yearned for. What made this plan so incredibly effective though was that not only did it help Sung in pretty much every way possible, but it also made Jinho look damn near perfect. Since Sung was the only one at risk in all this, should he complete all 20 raids without issue whatsoever, then Jinho would be the leader who ran 19 raids without a single casualty. It was a clear display of his capacity to lead that Sung was sure could win his father over, or at the very least make Jinho think it could. This was exactly what had happened, since as soon as that point was made, Jinho was in agreement, resulting in a joint venture in which Sung would get his money and experience, and Jinho would get a clear path towards becoming Guildmaster. Once again, I'm sure this will come up in a later episode, but I'm curious to see how they'll do it since it'll require a completely new scene. Fast forward to Sung's completion of the hidden quest, and the rewards he got were actually quite interesting. Plus 10 stats was instead actually all stats plus 3, and the random boxes he got had important descriptors to them. Apparently the Blessed would provide Sung with what he wanted, whereas the Cursed said that it would give Sung what he needed. Since he wasn't sure whether this would turn out to be a monkey paw incident though, Sung knew he should probably play it safe. He decided to choose Blessed over Cursed because something he wanted was definitely something he needed, whereas something he needed might not necessarily be something he wanted. Say he felt he needed a powerful weapon, then it's possible the box would spawn a bomb and blow up everything. That was the type of thing Sung was thinking about when considering the Cursed box. Luckily, this key was exactly what he needed, so there wasn't much regret in not choosing the Cursed box. Now, an important detail about the key is the distinct wording used to differentiate it from the other key. Unlike how the previous stated that he would be moved into a dungeon, this one here said that he would simply enter one. It was a peculiar change that made him think perhaps he could move in and out of the dungeon. This would actually be the first thing Sung would test upon entering it, and it would prove to be true as no invisible wall prevented him from leaving. He was free to enter and exit as many times as he wanted. Now, something the manhwa did that neither the anime nor novel did was provide justification for why Sung wanted to enter the dungeon so bad. I mean, he knew he stood no chance in a dungeon that was like the S rank, and he knew the smart thing to do would have been to level up some more then enter it. Yet, despite knowing that this gate was exponentially harder than the C, B, or even A rank ones, he still wanted to enter for one single reason only. He felt the need to know exactly how strong he was. Call him greedy or call him stupid, but to Sung, who knew what awaited him in the future, this right here was a necessary part of determining his true capabilities. Part of the reason he knew this was impossible now though was because if this was in fact an S-rank dungeon like how the key's rarity indicated, then even a full team of S-ranks would only have a 50% chance of completing it. He likened it to the S-rank dungeon break of Jeju Island, which to this day remains uninhabitable since no amount of hunters has been able to clear it yet. So, if one were to open up in Korea right now, then every hunter in the country would still only have a near zero chance of beating it. The monsters within were just that terrifying. Their defenses were near impenetrable, and their attacks were strong enough to insta-kill. So, why would Sung put himself at risk facing monsters like that? Well, he needed to know if he was strong enough to fight said monsters. Would his current level of power be enough to even damage them? The immediate answer to that was no, but after a more prolonged fight that the anime did the best out of all the mediums, Sung was able to prove otherwise and defeat the Cerberus. Both the manhwa and novel had a much shorter fight, so I actually prefer the anime since they really highlighted Sung's struggle with it. The novel was the usual confident Sung with minimal hassle, while the manhwa had him snapping necks and chopping out eyeballs. Both took advantage of the status refresh, but they never really had him on edge like the way that the anime did. It was a nice change since this was after all an S-rank monster. An opponent I think if he defeated with ease would display a scaling of power that would be a bit too fast even for my liking. It certainly wouldn't have shown that his current state was too weak to face off against the rest of the dungeon. That's the message that was made loud and clear here, and it's that which brings us to the end of the episode now. So that's everything we missed from episode 7, and knowing all that, my personal rating for it would be 7.5 out of 10. It was a good episode with lots of action, but I think they could have done more to highlight Sung's desire to know how strong he was. It was after all the primary justification for choosing to put everything at risk like this. Now, as I said in the beginning, I'd love to know what you personally would rate the episode too. You know, a simple number out of 10 or something more just to see if I could turn the comment section into a weekly discussion board. Yes, it is to help drive up comment engagement, but it's also so people can come in and quickly scroll down to see a number rating for how the episode was. I think it'd be pretty cool to have like an AniNews community rating for them. So maybe we can try that out for the next few episodes, then if it sticks we can do it for every anime I cover. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!